This podcast is a proud member of the Unidentified Network.
On the Track is a monthly web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues, and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
So what have we got exciting that's coming up in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, in this episode we go back to the United States, where we hook up again with our old friend Ray Harwood, the Sasquatch archaeologist.
I really like the old credits.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of... Oh dear, not again. Something really stupid's happening over there.
Jeff, the talking mongoose, what's going on today's show? Barry, we've got a grand old show today. We've got a top-of-the-notch guest. And who's that? It's Bernie Clifton and his comedy ostrich, and he's going to be teaching us all about Dadaism.
And I've just noticed something. Whilst putting in a picture of Bernie Clifton to illustrate what Jeff just told us, look at this, separated at birth. Yes, the Reform Party are going to rebrand themselves again as Nigel Farage and his comedy ostrich. It's all beginning to make sense now. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name's John Downs, I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to another episode of On the Track. Now, it's a show which comes out twice a week, on Wednesday evenings at 6:30 for about a quarter of an hour, and on Saturday afternoons at 3 for about half an hour. And it is a mélange, a mixture, a montage, a medley. Lauren, what else begins with M?
Mouse, of course.
Thanks, honey. Yes, I can work with that. It's a mouse of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. What's surreality? Well, I think you're probably going to have to ask him.
Don't ask me, me duck. I may have been King Richard I of England, but I couldn't speak English.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are for the star of this week's show. It's the day before my 65th birthday, and I can't think of a better way of sharing this day before my 65th birthday, before I officially become a silly old git, with our friend and eminently interesting researcher Ray Harwood, otherwise known as the Sasquatch archaeologist. Check this one out, guys. So Ray, how's life been treating you?
Oh, not too bad. Same as everybody else.
Yeah, we're in worrying times at the moment, I think.
Yeah, I think we're probably in a pretty stressful situation in both countries at this point.
And I think it's only going to get worse. But
Yeah. Well, we have an election coming up in November, and if it's as weird as the last one 4 years ago, it's obviously a lot worse. I mean, we've had all sorts of attempted assassinations and murders and all this type of thing, and with the economy collapsing, whatnot, Yeah, it's getting a little weird.
But where human society keeps on going up and down and round and round and round.
Yeah.
But
Just like
we want to know about Bigfoot society.
yeah. Well, that's why Get Bigfoot's so great. You can get away from reality for a little while and look for someone who's not really killing everybody. But yeah, it's a strange situation. I mean, if you read history, it's been going on since the beginning.
Oh yeah, and people have got complacent because we've been in a relatively peaceful era for about 80 years,
Right.
which
Right.
is much longer than it usually is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very strange. Yeah, I don't think that people are ready for what's going to transpire, but it no one ever is, right?
I don't think so.
So, okay, so where do you want me to start? I don't remember where we left off.
Well, I was really fascinated when you were talking about what we decided was Bigfoot archaeology.
Oh, okay.
I like the way that that you are finding artifacts and explaining or hypothesizing what they're used for and coming up with explanations which give us a much better insight into the behavior of these creatures.
Right. Okay. So do you want me to go ahead and start in on that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, since we last talked, I've been spending most of my time in Montana, which if you look at the map of the United States, the coastal area is in the northwest part of the United States, which is as famous for Sasquatch. You have Washington State, which is just below Canadian British Columbia. And then next to that, you got Washington State, which is famous for the Cascades and that sort of thing, and the volcanoes and the Sasquatch in that area. And then you have Idaho, which is sort of a panhandle. It's wide at the bottom, at the southern part of the state. Then in the middle of the state, it goes very thin, like a panhandle, and goes up to the Canadian border there. And so it's in half a day, yeah, about half a day, you can drive from the border of Washington State across the Idaho Panhandle into it would be northwest Montana. So I've been doing my research type things in a massive lake there in Montana called Flathead Lake, and bordered on both sides by two Indian reservations. Native American, they call them Indian reservations on the sign still, but they keep changing the name. They don't, but the powers that be keep changing the name of the Aboriginal inhabitants. But anyway, in any case, they're on one end, which would be the western end of Montana, is the Flathead Reservation, and it spans many, many, many miles, like 100 miles or so, over to Flathead Lake, and then the Blackfoot Reservation begins at that point. And then at that point, you have Flathead Lake, and then you have the biggest wilderness area that's virtually untouched in the lower 48 called the Bob Marshall Wilderness. And there's no roads in there. It was decreed to be, a nature preserve type area. And in that area, there's like I said, there's no roads. I think there's small airports within, but you can reach it pretty much the distance I wanted to go in. You have to use horseback. So I've been on trail rides with horses pretty much all my life, and my grandfather had a cattle ranch, and so I'm familiar with horses. But to do what I wanted to do, and this is the article I sent you, to do what I had to do, I had to go back to I joined a horse school. And then it was divided up into, English riding and Western riding, Western, like cowboy type rodeo stuff. So I started off with the English, and then once I got, proficient in how to do it the right way instead of just riding along on a pack train, then I switched over to Western rodeo training. And then with my idea of at a certain point, I wanted to try to do a calf roping type maneuver and rope a Sasquatch with a lasso. And the way I got this idea is in the 1800s, the Spanish cowboys here were actually going out and roping grizzly bears. And then later on, cowboys off ranches would go up, rope bears, both black bears and grizzly bears, and sell them to zoos or whatnot. So I thought, well, if you can rope a grizzly bear, you should be able to rope a Sasquatch. So I started in on that. And so the area I picked was Bob Marshall Wilderness. And the reason I thought it would be, that it would work is because if you look at the Patterson-Gimlin 1967 film, the classic film, they were able to ride right up on a female Sasquatch by a little creek bed. And, the theories are that the elevated position on the horse gave them, the high ground to visually see the Sasquatch. The other things that my dog's trying to eat my artifacts. Don't eat those. So then, and the other thing is that the smell of the Sasquatch, the smell that Sasquatch was picking up would be the horse and not the human. So it would be kind of help you disguise your smell. And there was a couple other things, but the theory I came up with is she wasn't by the creek to get water. She was hiding behind this enormous root ball on this fallen tree. And I think she was laying in wait. And I think she was actually going to hunt the horse, because wild horses in Northern California, Oregon, Utah, all the Western states, there's a plethora of wild horses population. And there has been, since the pioneer days. And of course, that's what helped set up the horse culture of the Great Plains for the Native Americans, like the Comanche, the Sioux, and they're with the teepees and the mobile horse cultures. So anyway, the horses have been out there quite a while. And my theory was she was laying in wait to hunt for the horse. And then if you look at the famous Sierra Sounds recordings of Ron Moorhead and company, they had those experiences in a horse camp. They'd all taken a pack train of horses up into the Sierra Nevada mountains of Northern California or Central California, and gone up, several hours ride up to this horse camp where they did all sorts of things. They rode their horses, they hunted deer, they camped out and things like this. And then, of course, they eventually got recorded these sounds. But they had horses. And I think what it was is the smell of the horses was like a dinner bell, and it brought those Sasquatches in. The horses were tethered at night. So my theory is that they were actually there to eat the horses, to hunt the horses. And then as a byproduct of that, they were able to capture the sounds. So it was sort of twofold. My idea is like, okay, you have bait, which is the horse, and then you have the elevated position. And then if you can bring them in close enough, you can actually lasso one, and then you could get DNA samples, maybe put a tracking device on it or something of that sort. Because the logistics of actually capturing it, putting it in a cage and bringing it back would be, too expensive and overwhelming for myself. But to lasso it, get maybe a blood sample, hair sample, and a massive amount of photographs, and then put a tracking device in it. that would be the thing. So anyway, that's what got me to Montana, is this idea. So I went on several trips up with the horses, and I did find artifacts. So that brings me back to the artifacts. I didn't, of course, didn't lasso a Bigfoot, or I would be on the news. But my intent was there, and I mean, I haven't given up hope. I'm still going to rodeo school, still practicing roping, and still going out on horseback, probably in Washington once a week, in Montana once a month. So, okay, so what I found this time was interesting. At one point, in a place called the Swan Valley, which is between Flathead Lake and the Bob Marshall Wilderness, I was going up, I was on a trail, a dirt mountain trail, and I decided to cut across the in the brush. So we walked up, and it's a lot easier on horseback than it is on foot. So you can cover a lot more ground, and especially uneven ground or brush covered ground. And if it's hard to get through on a foot, usually a horse can just go right through it like a deer or a moose or an elk. So anyway, we transposed ourselves through the woods, and I came to like a hollowed out area in some brushy trees. Most of the trees are pine trees, of course, up in all through the Northwest. But beneath the pine trees, there's shrub type trees. And so anyway, there was an area with shrub type trees, and it had been hollowed out. So in effect, the brushy trees were formed like a dwelling almost. And so I went in there, and there was two fallen logs that were hollow. And when they, I don't know when they fell or if they were pushed, but anyway, they were lined up pretty evenly, and they were split. And then someone had taken long poles. There's what they call a lodgepole pine there, and the region it's called lodgepole pine is they're about that round, and they go straight up like 20, 30 feet, and they don't really change size much. So it's like a pole. And the Native Americans in the horse cultures use those for the teepee poles. That's why they're able to make those conical teepees with perfect poles, is the lodgepole pine. So you decorticate them, which is you take the branches, the bark and stuff off, and you have a pole with very little modification. So there was several lodgepole pines about 8 feet long and about that round, and they had been shoved in a crack in the hollow log and used them as a fulcrum and lever to pry the top off these logs. And I don't know if that was some kind of animal that had been in there, like a skunk, a squirrel, a marmot, or there's porcupines. There's all sorts of animals that live in these hollow logs. And it looked to me like something and there was probably 3 poles per log that were still sitting right there where these logs have been pried in half. I looked everywhere for other tools, like something that might have modified the lodgepole pines, but I didn't find anything. I looked for footprints. The problem there is there's like a midden or a carpet of pine needles all over the ground. So you don't really get footprints. There's no substrate. You can't get to dust or dirt in these deep forests because they're covered with pine needles. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting. Wow. Because I've found those poles elsewhere, not as big, but smaller ones that it looked like they've been used to knock pine cones, squirrels, pine grubs, birds' nests out of trees. So like if it was the Sasquatch, you would go up to the tree, take this long pole like a fishing pole and whip it against the tree, knocking down nuts, knocking down birds' eggs and nests, knocking down a squirrel, or that sort of thing. And I found those poles in the deep woods, and there's not really any reason for humans to go out there and take a long pole type stick and then decorticate it, remove the bark and remove the stick and start whipping a tree. There's just no, if there's certain kind of things like, pinion nuts, grow like in California, in the Sierra Nevadas, and the Paiute Indians there, they actually do use these whips to knock the pine cones off and pick up the pinion nuts and then process them into, whatever food type they're going to do. But they don't have anything like that here. There's no pinion nuts up in Montana, northern Montana, Idaho, and Washington. But you still have the poles, so they're knocking something else down. And, Fish and Game would frown upon it if they found out that you were knocking down, birds' nests.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's, basically illegal and whatnot and unethical. So anyway, but these poles are out there. I've never seen them that big or used for that purpose. Of course, now my eyes are open to it. And if I saw something like those poles sitting out for no reason, I could surmise that, hey, maybe they were used for some other function, maybe some function that I couldn't even conceptualize, or maybe as a lever and fulcrum, to pry something. I have found really large boulders. I mean, really pretty large. I'd say the size of what I could say, like a lounge chair size boulders, just moved for no apparent reason. And then you think, I've brought this up in discussions before, and people say, well, maybe it's miners, but there's no elements, there's no precious metals, there's no gemstones or anything of that sort in the substrate. It's just organic and clay and loam and stuff mixed together. There's nothing to mine in the top. So there would be no reason to pull it up. And then the other theory is that bears were moving these rocks to get at a tasty root or a grub or a snake or something that might have been under the rock. So if I could I never thought about the fulcrum and lever concept until I saw those logs pried apart. So if I was to go back where I saw those boulders moved and there was a pry bar, a pole that looked like it was used to pry them up, then I would know it had to be either human or Sasquatch. So anyway, so I have that I've been looking at. And even some of these boulders have been picked up, which rules out humans completely.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, says, don't forget to ring the notification bell, otherwise you'll miss the new episodes.
And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
These might look like ordinary, everyday people, but they're not. Let's take a closer look. I'm filling my tomato harness with talcum powder on the moon. Back seats that keep a welcome in the hillside. Cherry ripe, cherry ripe. I live inside of a crab with Rip Van Winkle and the Patty Cake Man. Yes, they were all wazzocks. You can tell wazzocks by their general waz-tardedness. So remember, think once, think twice, think wazzock.
That was a public information film.
And here we are, ladies and gents, at the end of another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to say a big thank you to my guest this week, the wonderful Ray Harwood. He's going to be back next week for the second half of our discussion about his adventures in Montana. And I want to say a big thank you to Richard Freeman and V. McCrinnan, without who I couldn't have done this show. And I want to say a big thank you to my producer, Louis, who at the moment is still gallivanting around the colonies pretending to be Uncle Sam. What happens next in the wonderful life of Louis, I have no idea, but I will bring you up to date whenever I have any more stupid stories about him. I want to say a big thank you to Graham Inglis, the Deputy Director of the CFZ and my carer, but for whom I couldn't survive in this house. It's one of the reasons I'm moving back to Exeter, that I need to be in a place that I can be safely left alone in, and this house, being old and rickety, isn't that. And I want to say a big thank you to the lovely Gwyn Palmer, but for whom we really wouldn't be able to function. She does so much behind the scenes you wouldn't believe it. I'm going to be back on Wednesday. What are we talking about on Wednesday? I've got no idea. I haven't done it yet. But I will be back next Saturday. And like I just said, we're going to be having the second part of my discussion with Ray Harwood. And we've got all sorts of exciting things coming up, including his encounter with the Flathead Lake Monster. So, boys and girls, are you there, McCrinnan? Mr. McCrinnan? Are you going to be watching it next week, Mr. McCrinnan? Because if you're watching and I'm there doing the live chat and the notifications and all the other stuff I do, then no doubt I shall be seeing you.